So please keep passing and pouring because again, there's a lot of wines here. But I wanted to talk about two things first. And those two things really relate to if you're going to present these wines. Now, I now own 3 stores, and obviously, if I do schedule 3 tastings on a Thursday at one time, I can't present at all 3 stores simultaneously. So we're recording these with the idea that we can present the same presentation or the same ideas in a presentation for all 3 stores. And I love that idea. Now, one of the feedbacks that I have got is that having me not present actually changes the presentation. Now, I would expect that's actually for the good because I generally drink through all my presentations, and by the end of it, it's just kind of a sloppy mess. In fact, I was texting Joe Kane earlier this morning, and I remember one where we just stopped at the 3rd flight and drank all the Horton Charlemagne, and that was the end of the presentation. But one of the things that I would like to suggest is that if you are interested in presenting for Waterford, we of course would like you to present for Waterford, but there is something that I think there are many things that I think set these tastings apart, and in particular there's something about the presentations that I think set them apart. And that's what I'd like to talk about here. I think what sets them apart is the desire for context and the desire to present context with these wines. Meaning that we're not just going to sit here and talk about malolactic fermentation or grape blends or soil types for these wines or what kind of oak that they used. I want you to understand that these wines are made in a context. And I think that, if you can present it, gives a guiding force to the presentations. Now, I would say that about all presentations, yet the context changes with each presentation that we do. Here, I think there are 2 guiding contexts that I would want any presenter to be able to speak about, but I also think link the wines together in hopefully a very interesting fashion. The first here in Chianti or Tuscany with this tasting is the idea of time, and specifically the idea of history. Now I'm going to use time and history interchangeably in Chianti because sometimes our time frames are very long and sometimes our time frames are very short. But one of the things, and I would include this into the intro into the general public, is that if you can tack on, or if I can give you a sense of the time frames in Chianti and these wines, it will give you anchor points for why these wines are the way they are. And it will be very significant. And for some of us who have been drinking Chianti a long time, it will actually give us an inference into what producers are doing, why the wines taste the way they do, and give us a much greater depth of knowledge of these wines. So that's one leitmotif, one context that I hope to wrap up for you guys is time on these wines, the history of these wines. Even though we're not tasting many back vintages, but a historical perspective of them. The other very interesting thing I think to try and present at this tasting, which doesn't occur at every tasting that I do, is what do these wines taste like? Now that may seem ridiculous, especially since you have them in your glass and you can just drink them. But what I would posit to you is if we started a tasting about, say, Napa Cabernet, or we started a tasting about New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, I would guess that you all have an idea of what those 2 things taste like. Sort of like if we started a tasting that was about roasted potato, and we were just going to taste roasted potatoes, you have an idea of what those things taste like. So, Napa Valley Cab, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, you have an idea of why those wines or what those wines taste like. Now, I would guess in this tasting, if I say Chianti, or if I say Brunello, or maybe even if I say Super Tuscan, you also might have an idea of what those wines taste like. But what I can tell you is over the years that I have been doing this tasting, these wines will not be all what you expect. Meaning that one guiding leitmotif, one contextual element that we can think about when we taste these wines is, what are they supposed to taste like? What is our frame of reference for these wines? Are they supposed to taste like Sangiovese? And if we were studying for a Master Somm exam, that would be arenaceous tannins, dusty, dry tannins, bright cherry fruit, high acid. Are they supposed to taste like a Super Tuscan that's made of entirely Merlot? Very dark black fruit, the gravel character of Pomerol. Are they supposed to taste like a Cabernet, meaning rich black currant fruit, structure and tannins, but not as high acidity as Sangiovese? Or something else? So one of the guiding forces of this tasting, and it's one that I always think is best to welcome the general public to, is what do you expect these wines to taste like, and do they meet your expectations? So those would be the two things to guide us through this tasting if you were presenting it. Okay, so I've made the tasting even longer. So we'll stop there. Jason, if you don't mind breaking the video now, just so everyone else can ignore that, and we'll go into the first flight.